Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement live stream broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and if you would like to ask questions during the show, just go to the Uphill Media channel on YouTube, and there'll be a place for you to type them in. And my co-host, Betsy Cunningham, will relay them to me, and we'll do our best to answer them. Today on our show, we're going to have a weekly update, and it's mostly going to focus on what we did last weekend at the Platform Convention. Then we're going to talk about the National Popular Vote legislation and its history in Oregon. Then we have two candidates we'll be talking to today. We have Joyce Judy, who's running for Senate District 11, and Rachel Prusak, who's running for House District 37. And then we'll do upcoming events. So last weekend, from Friday evening through Sunday, was the Platform Convention of the Democratic Party of Oregon. That's where the people get together and they craft the platform and legislative agenda items. The platform is an expression of the values of Democrats, and that's what differentiates us from the other political parties in Oregon. This year there was over 500 delegates, so it was almost twice as big as conventions in recent years. And they were from all corners of Oregon. And what was amazing about the event is the amount of agreement there was and consistency in the values of Democrats. So there's no rural urban divide within the Democratic Party, and there's no blue dog versus yellow dog versus screaming liberal split. There was like 95% total agreement on all the issues, and when there was disagreement, it was was in the details. I brought you some pictures from the convention. So the first picture is the opening evening. The chair of the convention was our Democratic Party of Oregon Vice Chair, Valdez Bravo. And what we did on Friday night was we elected the convention officers and adopted the rules of the convention. And as I've said before, I really love these events because they're rituals in parliamentary procedure that date back to the founding of our country over 200 years ago. So the Saturday was devoted to legislative agenda items. The topics were divided up into 11 articles, and there were two sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. This was the morning session for the Environmental Caucus that had over 120 people attending. And way at the front of the room was the moderator. And we were delighted because at the end of the session, we got to vote on the various legislative agenda items that had been proposed, and the LNG, the anti-LNG issues that we had been promoting were ranked at the top, and so hopefully they will end up in the final list. In between the sessions, and we did live stream broadcasting from the convention. So if you were able to catch those wherever you were in Oregon or actually in the world, you could hear us interview various delegates, and we had people from all age ranges and backgrounds, and many of which were there for the first time. It was really fun to interview everyone and get their perspective on what was going on. On Saturday night, we had an event at one of the local pizza parlors, and just left of center is our candidate that we'll be talking to in a few minutes, Joyce Judy. This was her sort of debut in public because she had most recently filed for office. It was a really fun event, and it was really great to get together and spend some time with all the crazy progressives in Oregon. The next shot is of our Uphill Media crew setting up, getting ready. We live streamed the entire convention on Sunday, and so it's out there if you would like to listen to the discussion and what went on. It was all very civil and polite, and all run very fairly. The next slide shows the Sunday setup, with the convention being run by Valdez Bravo again. On one side is Wanda Davis, the vice chair of the convention, who ran a couple of the segments, and then on the left side is the convention secretary, who recorded everything that was done, and also projected on the screen when things were being discussed, so everyone could see the language.
Hey, Larry.
Yes, John.
I just want to say this was the coolest democracy thing I've attended so far. That was the most awesome. I mean, just watching everything happen. On the other hand, we've got a lot of work to do to bring the Democratic Party out of 19th century tools like the projectors and stuff. But anyway,
yeah,
it was awesome. That's all.
Can you imagine well, there was a much smaller group in Independence Hall 200 years ago, so
yeah.
They didn't need all that technology.
No, they could hear each other. No Jim.
So the next slide is the second plenary session. That's all the delegates that were in attendance, and we were organized by county, and periodically we had to do vote counts from the floor, and so the delegation chairs from each county would count the votes and report them, and then we're total. There was one moment where the vote was tied. It was like 145 to 145, which was just amazing. But it was on a procedural issue. It wasn't a value or anything. And the final slide from the convention shows you how we were debating. So the top part of the screen is the platform plank that was presented, and this one was particularly interesting because one of the most unpopular issues in the LNG issue is the fact that they passed legislation in 2011 that, for all intents and purposes, granted eminent domain to corporations to take people's land for their pipeline. And so this was read by Mayor Gamba, and the language that we voted in states that the state agencies in the legislature shall interpret Article 1, Section 18 of the Oregon Constitution in the most restrictive way, the phrase public use, when the taking in question would transfer ownership from one private entity to another. So we hope, so this is in the platform, the 2018 platform that we passed, and we can now go to the legislature and say, this is one of the values in the platform of the Democratic Party of Oregon. You need to deal with that legislation that you passed. We also had a legislative agenda item to rescind that language, because the taking of people's private property for corporate use is something that spans all political values on all political spectrums. So that was our weekend. It was exhausting. The session on Sunday lasted some 7 hours, and we got out around 4 o'clock. And many people had to drive back much farther distances than I did. You know, and there's parts of the state that are 5 hour drive away from Salem, which is where it was held. So our first segment today is on the National Popular Vote Compact. And we have with us Eileen Reavey, who is the co-chair of National Popular Vote Oregon. Welcome, Eileen.
Good morning, Larry.
It's so good to have you. I met Eileen when we were working on this in 2016. So why don't you go ahead and give us an overview of what the National Popular Vote Compact is.
So the National Popular Vote Compact is a piece of legislation that we can pass here in Oregon that gets us on the goal of the very simple idea that every American's vote when they go into the voting booth, or if they vote from their living room like we can do here in Oregon, when they cast their vote for president, it should count the same as every other citizen's vote for president. So it's a piece of legislation that enacts a national popular vote. So when you think of national popular vote, a lot of people know that we have the Electoral College, and people know that, oh, does that require a constitutional convention? Do we have to change the US Constitution? But the good news is no. There are two ways to go about having a national popular vote. And I am advocating for the simpler way that people here in Oregon have a voice in doing. So the way that an interstate compact works and the way this legislation works is that every state has a number of electors in the Electoral College. And the Founding Fathers gave us the ability to change how our electors vote. I have here my pocket constitution. And Article 2 of the US Constitution says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. So what that really means is that we can choose electors that vote however they want. What 48 states currently do is have electors that vote in the candidate that gets the most votes within their state. 2 states don't use this system, Maine and Nebraska. They use a different way of awarding their electors. But I think as Americans, we've gotten really used to thinking that this is the only way that we can vote. It's certainly been the only way in probably in everyone's lifetime that's listening right now. We're very familiar with that winner-take-all method. But it actually wasn't until the 10th election for US president that a majority of states use this winner-take-all law. So changing how our electors vote is something that we have the power to do. And actually, the Oregon legislature specifically has the power to do. So I'm advocating for Oregon to join an interstate compact that says our electors will no longer go to whoever gets the most votes just in Oregon, but will go to whoever gets the most votes nationwide. And it is an interstate compact, which means that other states are joining this too. 10 states and DC have already signed on. But none of us change our state laws until 270 electoral votes are committed, which is the number you need to elect a president. So we're about 65% of the way there. Here in Oregon, this bill has been passed by the House in 2009, 2013, 2015, and 2017. Every single time it has been referred over to the Senate and has died without having a vote on the floor. This bill was not allowed to even be considered by committee for the first 4 times that it was considered by the House. In 2017 was the very first time that we even had a hearing in the Senate on this bill. So the reason for all of this obstruction is because the Senate president doesn't like this bill. It's as simple as that. He doesn't like it. He doesn't think it should be law. And he is using his power to block all of our voices and to block every one of his senators' voices from being able to vote on this bill. So 2017 was the first time we had a hearing. It did not pass. Excuse me, I shouldn't say it didn't pass. It never went to a vote in committee. I firmly believe and know that we had the votes to pass it out of committee. So that was really frustrating. We also had the votes to pass it on the floor. So despite a majority of support in the Rules Committee and in the Oregon Senate, this bill has not been able to have its day in court, so to speak. And again, in 2018, during the short session, we were very surprised to actually have a chance to pass this bill. But ultimately, it was blocked again and was not brought forth for consideration. It's really frustrating for a bill that we're advocating for every vote to count to not even be able to have a vote in the floor of the Senate. So it's something that we feel really strongly about. The National Popular Vote Oregon is a grassroots organization that's been around for about 1.5 years. We have got a lot of support for this bill. I just checked the other day, and in the 2017 session, over 1,300 pieces of testimony were submitted for the bill in support, which is a really astounding number for Oregon. Most bills maybe get 15 or 20. The Senate president received over 15,000 emails from our network of people asking him to move the bill. And just this past weekend, we were successful at getting a plank for supporting the election of president by national popular vote in the Democratic Party of Oregon platform. So it's something that people really support, and the support across the state is there, but we're just really need one person to allow a vote to happen in the Senate for this bill to become law.
And G, has there ever been a president elected that did not receive the popular vote?
Yes, that has happened 5 times. So most recently in mind, it's happened twice in my lifetime, and was with the 2000 election of Al Gore versus George Bush. And also most recently in 2016, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. I consider my personal work on this kind of coming full circle because I learned about the Electoral College. Don't, dislike me too much for admitting my age here. But I was in elementary school when Al Gore lost the popular vote to George Bush. And I learned about the Electoral College and thought, this doesn't make sense. And this just really is not a system that seems logical. I went to bed that night and thought, oh, I'm going to know who the president is. And we didn't know for about a month. And what do you mean it's not the person who got the most votes? That's absolutely ridiculous. So I've always thought that this system was flawed and didn't have a reason to come back around to it until after the 2016 election, when I thought, wow, if 3 million more people can cast their vote for a candidate and that candidate doesn't become the one who ends up in the White House, that doesn't work. And how are we supposed to go out and tell our youth to vote and that their voices matter when, no, it depends on what state you live in if your voice really matters. You should move to Ohio if you want you to have a voice. And I don't think that that's a system that's right. It's not American and it's undemocratic. So I'm here to change it. And
and one of the interesting things is, we elect Democrats to the Oregon legislature, and they've been in charge for a number of years. And this is the first time that it really exposed the almost arrogance of the legislators and their indifference to what the people want, because we lined up 24 resolutions from 24 counties, county party organizations in the Democratic Party, to pass resolutions in support of national or popular vote. And that was topped off by the resolution that was passed in the Democratic Party in March of last year in support of national popular vote. And so even with all of that support, it did not move the Senate president or the chair of the Rules Committee to support this. And so it really begs the question: why do we elect Democrats to office if they don't carry out our values?
Yeah, absolutely. And why are we putting so much energy into going out and saying that we need a supermajority and we need to elect Democrats and any Democrat is better than any Republican? That's just, we need to be going back to what are the values of our candidates. And especially when it comes to things like this, how can you have 200 calls in a day of people telling you, your own constituents saying, I want you to pass this bill, and eventually moving on to the point, I'm not even asking you to vote for the bill. I'm just asking for you to allow your fellow senators to vote for the bill. You don't even have to vote for it, Senator Courtney. You don't have to vote for it, Senator Burdick. We have the votes without you. And they still would not even allow the democratic process to go forward of allowing a vote.
Yes, what we realize that there's a difference in Democratic candidates, and one of the things that we're focusing on, and we often argue about what does the term progressive mean, and to me it means representing the people as opposed to corporations, and there's a very distinct difference when someone is representing the public, and you see what goes on in Salem and the lobbyists roaming up and down the hallways and the amount of money that is thrown at legislators, and you really wonder who represents the people.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, go ahead.
It's felt very frustrating. This was my first legislative session, 2017, working on a bill in Oregon. I wasn't in the state before that. And it's hard to feel so powerless that as a citizen grassroots organizer, I am doing absolutely everything that I can think of to pass this bill. And we're getting the support of thousands of people across the state to call their legislators and call on them to take action. But it's still not doing the job because one person is able to say no. And do I need a lobbyist? Do us as citizens, do we need to go and hire somebody to work on this because we're not able to get it done with grassroots power? I don't know the answer, but I certainly hope that we in Oregon evolve to a place where that's not the only way that you can get legislation passed, that citizen voices do matter.
Cool. Well, why don't you stay on while we go to our next guest?
Hang on, Larry. Before you go to the next guest,
sure.
And you haven't brought Betsy in for questions, and maybe Betsy already had this one lined up, but Bram has a pretty good statement here, and it's something that I've heard a lot of people say an argument against getting rid of the Electoral College. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. And he says, if we implement the popular vote, it will give it will give bad actors just a handful of precincts that they'll need to manipulate in order to alter the election in their favor. We need to think about this. What do you say to that statement?
So I would say that the way that we currently elect the president, we allow people to allow that exact situation to happen, where you only need to win a couple of precincts in certain states to sway the overall vote. So a national popular vote actually allows for more secure election because people are able to, excuse me, there's a lot of background noise. Sorry. I apologize. Electing a president by popular vote, you allow every vote to count equally, no matter where it's cast. So you negate the problem of people being able to swing certain votes. In 2016, you only needed to sway 30,000 votes in Pennsylvania or 10,000 votes in Wisconsin in order to sway the election one way or the other with the Electoral College. With a national popular vote, you would need to sway or steal millions of votes. So it's actually a way to make our elections more secure.
The other argument that we hear is that it would make states like Oregon irrelevant because we're so blue, but actually the reverse would happen. We were considered a blue state, and so we rarely get to see presidential candidates when they run. We saw Hillary Clinton for an afternoon when she blew into town for a private high roller fundraiser. And the only exception was that Bernie Sanders actually came to the state at least 3 times for those huge rallies. And that's just because he was more of a populist, and he didn't have to go out and raise funds the way that other candidates do, just because he focused on millions of small donations.
Yes, and those were all visits that occurred during the primary, and we did not see a single candidate during the general election, which is the norm. And that's what you often see. California, Washington, Oregon, they already know how we're going to vote in the Electoral College. So once the primary is decided, we don't matter anymore, and candidates only come here occasionally to fundraise.
Were there any other questions, Betsy?
Well, I think Jilly Love 101, the people want it and the Senate bloc said democracy or totalitarian.
That's a question.
And that was a comment, not a question.
Well, it was kind of a question. It may have been rhetorical.
Indeed. Was there any other questions, or should we bring on our next guest?
No, I don't see any questions about this.
Okay. Well, one of the things that has enabled Peter Courtney to completely disregard the will of the people is the fact that he has not had an opponent in 20 years. And so our next guest is Joyce Judy, who has broken that trend. Welcome, Joyce.
Welcome, and thank you for having me today.
Yes, Peter Courtney has not had opposition, and so he's never had to make campaign promises or even campaign. But what happened last Saturday?
Last Saturday, well, I guess that was my launch party, if you will, where I came out and said, hey, I'm running against him. And as Eileen said, I think we really need to change the culture in our Senate. And I'm going to be the one to do that.
And who showed up for the first time asking for votes?
Who showed up asking for votes? A lot
Yes.
of progressive.
And perhaps your opponent showed up?
Oh, of course not.
Well, yeah, Peter Courtney showed up at the convention on Saturday.
Oh, yes, he did show up at the convention. That's correct. Which I guess, from what I heard, was the first time he'd been there. I don't know if that's true or not, but I did have an opportunity to actually meet the man for the first time. I had spent many times in the last year working on National Popular Vote to try and meet with him. I'm a constituent and never had that opportunity to meet with him. I emailed him, I phoned him, I tried to set up appointments and wasn't able to even meet him. And so finally I've met the man, I actually met him.
So are you saying that he does not hold regular meetings with his constituents?
No, not at all. I don't think he's never had a town hall to my knowledge. He's never been to my neighborhood association. I haven't ever seen him out there except when he's giving a speech at an event. That he will do. He'll give a speech at an event, but he doesn't actually sit down and have coffee or have a town hall or anything like that. He doesn't meet with people. And that's part of my reason for running.
And we are delighted that you stepped up. We had been searching for candidates to run against Peter, just to make it so that the electorate has a choice. We had been searching for months, and because of the power that Senator Courtney wields, people were essentially afraid. And I actually don't understand what they're afraid of, because it's not like we're in Russia and he's going to be poisoned or shot or imprisoned or something. We still live in America. But people are truly afraid to run against him because of, I guess, their political career is so precious to them that it would end or something. So thank you, Joyce, for stepping up.
No problem. I'm glad to do it. I'm happy.
And tell us about your values and what you're interested in advocating when you get elected.
Well, other than obviously the national popular vote is something I would love to see pass, I also am in favor of what I call the 3 H's. That's healthcare, housing, and homelessness. We have a crisis here in the state, both with housing and homelessness. And I believe that the Senate the Senate and the legislature as a whole needs to make these items an emergency. Just this last session, there was a joint resolution out of the House. That was House Joint Resolution 203 regarding making healthcare a right for all here in the state. And it passed the House committee, but once again, didn't get out of committee in the Senate. One can only think that, nothing gets through the Senate unless Senator Courtney wants it to. So is he against health care for all here in the state? I wonder.
And your other issues?
My other issues on gun control recently. I mean, that's a big issue today. Yesterday was a very huge, wonderful march with all the students around the country. I would very much like to see an assault weapons ban. I'd like to see magazines reduced in size. I'd like to see bump stocks eliminated. I'd like to strengthen our gun control legislation in general is another item.
John, could you show us the picture of the map? So it's a very interesting district. In Oregon, there are 30 Senate districts and 60 House districts. And the way they form Senate districts is they take 2 House districts and the Senate district represents both of them. This district is very interesting because it has an unusual shape. And someone asked on this program a couple of months ago if there was gerrymandering in Oregon. And I said, no, we don't do gerrymandering. But then you look at a district like this and you wonder, well, that's very interesting. What in common does Woodburn have with Salem, and why would those two be connected? Because when they combined the districts, they could have combined the Salem district with an adjacent Salem district, which would have been following the guidelines, because they're supposed to form districts with similar interests or common interests. But this reaches up the freeway where there's probably about 10 farmers, and then grabs Woodburn.
They share the I-5, Larry. That's what they share. It's the commonality.
Yeah. Yes,
Right.
the commute. So tell us about Woodburn.
Well, it's not just Woodburn, but in District 11 as a whole, 42% of the constituents are Hispanic. And that's probably in large part due to Woodburn and Gervais. And the other interesting statistic about District 11 is that something like 75% of the district have a high school education or less, which means that they're probably low income. And that goes to the housing crisis that we're facing here in the state and certainly in Salem, in this district. The cost of housing is going up, and it's not just homes, it's largely apartments, which is where all the low-income people live. My rents alone have gone up 13% over 2 years, each year. That's a huge increase, and it's happening to everybody. And what ultimately happens is they can no longer afford to live there on just a low income. They have money, they have a job, but they can't keep their apartments. So that's a huge issue, I think, for people. Immigrants and Hispanics in general are largely affected by this. They're having a huge issue with housing. And I really want to see a change in that. In the 2017 long session, there was a bill to eliminate no-cause evictions. It passed in the House and again died in the Senate. It was changed a million times to the point where it never existed anymore. And no-cause evictions are causing an increase in homelessness in our state.
And to put a face on it, it's you know, we often objectify the homeless and lose our empathy for them. But you know, there are situations in Portland where single moms with children are living in units, and the landlord decides that they want to upgrade their property to make more money, and so they have the ability to throw out their tenants, even though they've been ideal tenants taking care of the property and paying their rent on time. They have the ability to throw them out, and unfortunately, because the housing market in Portland in particular is so tight, right, there are not options for people to go to. And there are instances where people have to live in their cars until they finally locate another place to live in.
And many of them don't. And it's a spiral that happens with homelessness, is that you go first to your car to live in your car, and then something happens to the car, it needs repair or whatever, and you can no longer move the car, and so you'll lose the car and you're homeless for sure. The statistics are, you know, I mean, 12,000 homeless in the state alone. In Salem, we have something like 2,000 homeless. And one of the things that they've done in Salem is what's called Housing First, and that's a policy I'm very much in favor of. However, in Salem, they're only able to do that for like 100 people. And, you know, when you have 2,000 homeless, that really isn't going to solve the problem. We need a lot of money to be thrown at this. I don't know where it's going to come from, but it has to come from somewhere. That needs to be the focus of the legislature, is housing, to house everyone, not just the homeless, but everyone, and at all levels. And, you know, it needs to happen. It's an emergency. You know, and I also want to speak to the immigration rights. We have a huge problem with immigration. I you know, been doing some reading on the farm workers here in the state, and their plight is quite desperate. They don't get paid probably even minimum wage, and they have no control over that. They don't have unions to support them in many ways, and you know, their health care is virtually non-existent. They can't get health care, you know, because many of them are undocumented. So what they do if they're sick They go to an emergency room, and we ultimately all pay for this. So this goes back to my healthcare issue. We need to have healthcare for all of our citizens and all of our non-citizens as well. All Oregonians, period.
So how can we help? First of all, what's your website and what can people do on it?
People are always asking me that question. It's joyce4sd11.org, I think. It's hard for me to remember because we keep changing the names everywhere, but please go to my website, and if you would like to donate, that would be wonderful. But we also need volunteers. We'd like to, go out canvassing, making phone calls, sending emails, any number of different things where we can use some help in our campaign.
And because of the position that Senator Courtney has in the Senate, his occupation of that role affects every Oregonian across the state. And so replacing him with someone with a greater appreciation for democracy should be of interest to every Democrat in the state.
Yes, I agree.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Joyce. And again, thank you, Eileen. It was great to talk about national popular vote. We hope all those people turn out to support Joyce, and we can win this.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Our next guest is one of my favorite people in Oregon. It's Rachel Prusak, who is running for House District 37. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel, do you have your sound on?
Can you hear me now?
We can. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you for inviting me and inviting me to the conversation today.
So let's show the map of your district. Tell us about your district and who lives there, and what are the issues important to them?
Sure. So House District 37 is West Lynn, Tualatin, sliver of King City, sliver of Lake Oswego. And we now currently have a 7% Democratic edge for the first time in voting history. So I'm pretty excited about that. I've been knocking doors and holding meetings with constituents for the past several months. And I'm hearing a couple of top issues. One, that we need some solutions to traffic congestion, especially on Oregon Route 43 and 205. ODOT has been spending time visiting City Council and neighborhood association meetings and listening to constituents' concerns. And so I'm listening and learning as well. And it's definitely apparent that we need more public transportation serving these areas. There's a lot of talk about expanding the 205 and the 43, and we're making sure that we include conversations around public transportation in that talk. Knocking on doors, I have, earlier we're talking about no cause eviction. We have a pretty affluent community in House District 37, but we are seeing a housing crisis here as well. So I was knocking doors to just up the street from where I live to find out that everybody in an apartment complex received no cause evictions. This included elderly and disabled and families. I actually wrote a letter to the editor for our local paper. I thought it would be in this week and it wasn't. So hopefully it will be in next week about this issue. So really focusing on no cause evictions will be top priority. And school safety. I have been attending meetings with teachers, meetings with students, meeting with concerned parents about the safety in our schools with gun violence. I was included in testifying in the House and the Senate on House Bill 4145, which thankfully passed, passing a loophole for intimate partner members to purchase firearms. And the concern in the district would be that Tualatin was designed as a open area school, which is obviously good for learning. it's designed that way. But there's increased concern now for safety with gun violence. And so I stood with the students when they walked out of West Lynn for a moment of silence. I marched yesterday with the students across the state. And as I mentioned, I testified, and I have the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate that I'm really proud of. So I would say those are the top issues I'm hearing going to meetings. And I guess the other one would be distrust of elected officials and politicians. So I spend a lot of time knocking on doors and people wanting to immediately not talk about politics. And so I validate how they're feeling and remind them that's why it's important that we elect a nurse to represent us, because nurses are our most trusted profession. And as a nurse of 20 years serving communities across the country, I feel like I can take the voice and represent people and their needs.
And your opponent's most recent action that I'm aware of was she was one of the 3 people who sponsored Measure 101, which pretty much wasted $4.5 million on a referendum that failed. How's that going over in your district?
So, yes, as you know, I've been on the front lines of healthcare for all for a decade, and it was definitely what prompted me to run for office. I believe that healthcare is a human right, and the current representative actively tried to take it away, which is when I decided to run. So in House District 37, 57% of voters voted yes on 101. So Oregonians spoke and believed that protecting healthcare was important, and that includes this district.
What other issues would you like people to know about?
So besides healthcare for all, being on the front lines of healthcare, I see people struggle. I see people's inability to afford prescriptions, really focusing on making prescriptions affordable. I see people decide to pay rent or get the care that they need. So affordable housing, paid family leave. I've been lobbying with the groups that are really fighting for that. I've seen on the front lines the opioid epidemic robbing people of their lives. So once again, a really important issue. And education. Education is a bedrock of our community. And so fighting for revenue reform so that our public education has stable and predictable funding is really important. And am ready to have those bold conversations. I will take on the challenges in Salem as I have through my nursing career and have these difficult conversations. We can't solve any of these without funding.
Yeah. And I suspect that you will be fierce.
Thank you. Thank you.
Betsy, did we have any questions on the line for Rachel?
No.
Wow, you answered everyone's questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I really hope that you can exhibit leadership, and that's what I'm searching for in all the candidates that I want to support is it's great to vote as a block and when your values are shared, but when you are asked to vote for a piece of legislation that stinks just because whatever reason, we really need people to be independent-minded and willing to stand up for the public and not just stand up for whoever donates the most money or whatever reason that they do what they do in Salem.
I agree, and this campaign is very grassroots. You will see that almost every single donor has donated less than $100. So really growing this campaign with grassroots volunteers, hosting house parties, door knocking is how we're going to be able to win this.
And do you find that people are receptive to you when you knock on their door?
I do. I'd say the reason why I brought up the distrust of politicians is it's a very common thing that is said at the door. And so really talking about my experience as a nurse for the last 20 years, my experience of taking on challenges, my experience of taking on leadership positions has been what then kind of, takes that barrier, that guard, that armor off, and then we can have a real discussion. And so I might be spending a little bit longer time at the doors because of that, but building trust is important, and it's what I'm hoping to do.
And if people want to help your campaign, how do they find you?
So my website is rachelforstaterep.com. Following the campaign on Facebook, Rachel Prusak. I would really love that. If you go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter. And if you follow on the social media pages, you'll know about events. And we're just looking for volunteers to door knock every weekend and learn about the campaign. And continue on the process of getting endorsements, and with that, volunteers.
Cool. Any final closing words?
Wait, Larry, there's a question from Oz LaFave about whether you have some possible non-conventional ways to reach out to the voters that you're using.
I wonder what that means, non-conventional. So far it's been door knocking. It has been making calls to leaders in the district. It's been showing up at every event. I don't know if any of those are unconventional, but I'm always looking to explore any ideas people have.
Being with us today.
Yes. Saying yes to everything is something I'm open to. I'm learning from all of it and from all people.
Anything else, Betsy?
No, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you. Thanks.
So get out there and fight.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So upcoming events. So as you can imagine, we're getting close to the end of the primary. We are just a month away from the ballots arriving. So we have basically 4 more weeks of people learning about their candidates. If there's forums in your district, I encourage you to go to them and listen to the candidates. If you have a choice amongst the candidates in the primary, there's many elections in this cycle. In addition to the House races, there's a number of city council races and county commissioner races. And as we've said before, often it's the local elected officials that have the most impact on your life. So, whatever happens in Washington, D.C. seems to occupy the news, but the people that really affect what happens to you on a day-to-day basis are your local elected officials. Ballots arrive on the 26th. As you know, here in Oregon, we have basically 2.5 weeks to get our ballot in. Remember, the sooner you get your ballot in, the quieter your phone will get, because people know when you voted and they will stop harassing you to get your ballot in. So if you get your ballot in early, it'll be better for everyone, and they can focus on the people who still have not voted. And then we have the election coming up on November 6th. So that'll be the big one, when all the winners from the primaries face off, and we choose who elects us in the subsequent 2 years. A couple of announcements. We are forming a virtual group within the National Association of Parliamentarians for those who are too far away to physically attend some of the meetings that are generally focused in the Portland metro area. There's 3 groups in Portland, but if the bylaws of the group allows, we could do virtual meetings, and we would love to share this topic across the state. The more I'm watching how our local officials run their meetings, it seems they have only a passing familiarity with the concepts of parliamentary procedure. You can register at pdpo.org. There's a button at the bottom where you can submit your name, and we would like to build that up to a good 50 people studying the topics of parliamentary procedure, so that we can not only take back our democracy, but know the rules by which we can take it back. The final announcement is we have No More Fool's Day coming up. next weekend. So there will not be a regular broadcast at 10 o'clock next Sunday, but we will be doing the No Fools broadcast from, what is it, John, 4 in the afternoon until about 7:30?
Oh, about that. We'll actually be starting around 3:30 because I have a special guest coming on, Kelly, whose last name I can't remember right now, but she is the public relations individual for the Revolt Against Plutocracy, the group that started the CFAR. So we're going to talk with her, and then we'll have our first guest will be Dorothy Gasquet, showing up around 4:10. So really, it started about 3:30. It'll be fun.
And it's going to be a huge broadcast. We have the blue wall of Washington, Oregon, and California. So we'll have 5 candidates from each of the states talking about their candidacy and where they are in their campaigns and how things are going. So please join us and learn about all the great people that are running across the western segment of the United States. We are always in search of donations. So if you would like to financially support broadcasts like this, you can do that by going to donate.uphillmedia.org. We have plans this year of moving into a professional office space and getting more stable hardware. So the shows will only get better and better. But we can only do that if we have everyone's support. And of course, we love the Bernie Sanders models of many people giving small donations. Although if someone wanted to give us $1 million, we would be hard pressed to refuse because we know it would come with no strings attached.
We'd name the network after them. That'd be fine.
Or like the conference room. That's always a great naming.
Okay, that works. Yeah, whatever you want.
We have merch. So if you would like to get your Progressive Oregon merchandise, we can print it on a number of different types of products. So you can get a Progressive Oregon t-shirt in the various colors. You can also get a hoodie. The hoodies are really great hoodies. That's what I was wearing last weekend when we were doing interviews. And you can get neck kerchiefs for your dog. And you can also get products from Uphill Media itself. So it's great advertisement for both the program and the group that brings you these shows. So that's the end of our show today. Anything you'd like to add, Betsy or John?
Don't forget to do the thunderclap, everybody. If you've got a Twitter account or a Facebook account, do this. We've got 55 people that have signed up for it, and it shouldn't be that hard to get 100 people to do this. We actually paid money to do the special version of this, and we've got some good people that have signed on to it with some big accounts, but it's basically using your social media reach to help spread this event. So we'd really like you to go to do that. The links aren't in the description of this, but if you go to uphillmedia.org and click on Livestream Productions and look for the No More Fools fundraiser, all of this information is there. And join us. There you go. I'm done, Larry.
Anything else, Betsy, you'd like to add? Any final questions from the world?
No, there are no questions. It doesn't seem like. But I want to let people know on the April 15th show, we're going to have somebody from the Poor People's organization that is happening in the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's March on Washington.
And on April 8th, we'll be back to our regular broadcast schedule. So at 10 a.m. on April 8th will be our next regular show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great weekend and see you soon.
And I'll take us out with the tune, which is What a Fool Believes, Doobie Brothers. And everybody out there, I can't remember if I actually played this one already earlier this week on some other show, but it doesn't matter because it fits in line with our fools. What a fool believes he sees. The wise man does not have the power to reason away. Think about that. We just have to vote him out. No more fools.
your smile for his nostalgic tale. Never coming near what he wanted to say, only to realize it never really was. She had a place in his life. He never made her think twice. As she rises to her apology, anybody else would surely know he's watching her go. What a fool believes he sees. The wise man has the power to reason away what she